I love the title of the sort of cake you're going on to next. It's called An Extraordinarily Good Fruit Cake. Is that your title for it?
It is my title for it, and it is extraordinarily good.
Why is it so good?
Because it's got a can of pineapple in. May I just have a drink of water?
A can of pineapple? Oh, that's quite unusual, actually.
Well, it makes it very, very moist indeed. First of all, I'm going to sieve the flour. Seem to be minus a bowl, Judith. Can you... There it is. Thank you.
Now, you're sieving the flour this time because you're putting salt with it. I mean, you said you don't normally sieve it if you haven't got salt going through. Is that right? At the
That's
same
right.
time?
And I'm going to put a little bit of salt in. A good pinch of salt. There we are. And then I've got cherries that go with this recipe, and I've halved them, and I'm adding them to the flour.
And why do you do that? So that it doesn't sort of
So they don't
sink in one lump?
That's right. There we are. That's the work part of the recipe. And while I'm doing that, I'm going to just chop the pineapple at the same time. I'm using a 16-ounce can of pineapple. I've already chopped some of it, but I'm just going to show you how I chop it, because you needn't use rings. You can use whatever's cheapest at the time. And I just do it like this with 2 knives.
So it gets into nice small pieces.
Yes.
That's good. I suppose you could buy those tins with the small sort of tiny little chippings in, could you?
You could indeed, and that would be very, very good and very easy, but I just bought what was cheapest. And now to the actual making of the recipe. Cream the butter and sugar together, and it's 5 ounces of butter and 4 ounces of caster sugar.
Now, if you did that in a mixer, Mary, I suppose you could overdo that, could you? Or?
No, not very easily, but you're more likely to overdo it when you've added the flour. And then I'm going to add the eggs. It's a basic creaming mixture, as you would do for a Victoria sandwich.
And so therefore you're gradually adding the eggs.
That's right.
To absorb them into Looks lovely in life, doesn't it?
There we are. And then I'm going to add the rest of the egg and a little bit of the flour, just a little bit, so to stop it curdling.
I noticed 1 or 2, I'm starting now, I'm catching this. 1 or 2 of the cherries have gone in, that doesn't matter.
No. Here we are. And there's a little less sugar in than a normal recipe, cake recipe, because of the sweetened pineapple. There we are. And now to adding the rest of the ingredients. The flour, the 7 ounces of self-raising flour, 2 tablespoonfuls of milk, the crushed pineapple. Now, instead of adding that milk, just you could add 2 tablespoonfuls of brandy for a very special occasion.
Instead of the milk.
And 12 ounces of dried fruit, mixed dried fruit.
Well, the great thing about those packets is they're spin washed anyway, aren't they? So
Yes, and everything is all together, and you don't have any leftover packets. Dried fruit isn't as cheap as it used to be, and if you buy a 12-ounce packet of fruit, you haven't got any that perhaps you're not going to use up at a later date. There we are. Now that's a high proportion of flour than what you normally have, and just 2 eggs.
Why is it higher? Really?
Because the pineapple is wet.
Yes.
And therefore, the pineapple absorbs the extra amount of flour. Now that's beautiful colouring, and I'm going to put it into a large loaf tin. This is a 3-pound loaf tin that's been greased and lined.
Oh, should I have it? It's
Yes,
quite a heavy bowl,
we could
isn't
easily have an accident, couldn't we?
Well, it's a heavy bowl.
There we are. And again, you may not have a tin quite as big as this one. You could do half the amount in a 1.5 pound tin. There you are.
Super.
Just scrape all the mixture down. Got long arms. And that drops some out here. We won't waste any. just level it off. And this cake keeps very well indeed.
Because it's all very well, this is super for a family, and they probably would eat it, in one go. But if you're living alone, if you're on your own, it's something that you could store away.
Yes, you could.
And would last for, you say, 2 months?
2 months in a
That's
refrigerator.
fantastic. Why
Now,
a refrigerator?
Because of the moist pineapple, it can go off if you keep it in a warm kitchen. Now, I put 4 ounces total of cherries in the recipe, and I'm putting about 10 halved on top.
Now, they're not going to get burnt. I would have thought they sort of cooked or
no, they
overcooked.
haven't got burnt. If your oven is on slightly hot side, you may find that they could catch. So, if you like, put them in halfway during cooking. The cooking time for this is 2 hours, and it's in a fairly cool oven at 325, gas number 3. And you know when it's done, when it's risen to the top of the tin. We've got one here, Judith. That we've already cooked. When it's a good brown colour, and when you press the top of it, this is of course cold, the top springs back. But I always use a test that my mother used, and that's putting a skewer in. I don't believe all these sort of tests when you just finger touch. With a fruitcake, it's difficult. So let's just cut a big chunk off so that you can see what the inside is
And
like.
obviously, just to make an obvious point, if the skewer's clean, the cake's cooked.
Yes,
Yeah,
there we are.
lovely.
That's beautiful, and it's so moist, and
You
it
can
keeps
see
very
that, it's
well.
shining.